Jwwilliams funeral directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the Jwwilliams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At Jwwilliams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor and president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the Jwwilliams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Ms. Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter of Detroit, Michigan, formerly of Lee County, Georgia. The family of Miss Nellie Mae Cooks Whitis of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Henry Eugene Howard, Jr. of Rochelle, Georgia. Would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter, age 68, of Detroit, Michigan, formerly of Lee County, Georgia, died Friday, September 27th at his residence in Detroit, Michigan. The funeral service for Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter, age 68, was held Monday, October 14th, in the sanctuary of the Piney Grove No. 3 Baptist Church in Lee County, Georgia. The Reverend Christopher Perry, pastor. Reverend Gary Baker officiated. The burial followed in the churchyard cemetery. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Miss Christy Marie Porter of Sterling, Virginia, Miss Ashley Noel Gupton of Woodbridge, Virginia, his beloved and devoted sisters, Miss June Porter and Miss Madeline A. Porter, both of Detroit, Michigan, his caring brothers, Mr. John Albert Porter of Fermendale, Michigan, and Mr. James Michael Porter of Detroit, Michigan, a host of beloved cousins to include Mrs. Carolyn Mays Owens, Mr. Arthur Mays, Mrs. Stephanie Mays Scott, Mrs. Evelyn Mays Wright, Mrs. Maddie Sue Childs, Deacon Frank Mays, Mrs. Ann Mays Miller, Mr. Horace Noble Mays, and Mr. Raphael Porter, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter, age 68, of Detroit, Michigan, formerly of Lee County, Georgia. Mrs. Nellie Mae Cooks Whitis, age 79, of 1204 Blackshear Road, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 9th, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Nellie Mae Cooks Whitis, age 79, was held Saturday, October 19th, in the chapel of the Jwwilliams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend W. Wilson, delivered the eulogy. The Reverend Dion Jones officiated. The burial followed at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Johnny Floyd and his wife, Mrs. Veronica Floyd, of Warner Robins, Georgia. Miss Lena Whitis Toure of Lithonia, Georgia. Miss Bernice Whitis of Cordele, Georgia. And Miss Ladrika Daniels and her husband, Mr. Casadia Daniels of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and caring grandchildren, Miss Kinshada Whitis of Cordele, Georgia. Miss Jo Ford and Mr. Casadia Daniels Jr., both of Warner Robins, Georgia. Mr. Caden Daniels of Cordele, Georgia. Two beloved great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted sisters, Miss Doretha Whitehead, Miss Polly Thornton, and Miss Sally B. Reese, all of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Arthur Cooks Reese of Cordele, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces and nephews, to include a special nephew, Mr. Herbert Whitaker of Cordele, Georgia. A host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include Mr. Eugene and Miss Danita Bell of Cordele, Georgia. Survived Mrs. Nellie Mae Cooks Whitis, age 79, of 1204 Blackshear Road, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Henry Eugene Howard Jr., age 80, of 385 Mill Street, Rochelle, Georgia, died Friday, October 11th, at the St. Joseph Hospital in Savannah, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Henry Eugene Howard Jr., age 80, was held Saturday, October 19th, in the sanctuary of the Pine City Baptist Church in Rochelle, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Ernest Weaver, officiated. The burial followed in the churchyard cemetery. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Geneva Roberts Howard of Rochelle, Georgia. His loving and devoted children, Mr. Henry Howard and his wife, Mrs. Frantina Howard of Rochelle, Georgia. Mrs. Audrey Stanford and her husband, Mr. Roosevelt Stanford of Ashburn, Georgia. Mrs. Jacqueline Drummer and her husband, Mr. Harold Drummer of Orlando, Florida. Miss Sharon Howard George of Macon, Georgia. Mr. Benny Howard and his wife, Mrs. Latonia Howard of Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. Maurice Howard and his wife, Mrs. LaDonia Howard of Leesburg, Georgia. Miss Jessica Cunningham and her husband, Mr. Wayne Cunningham of Anniston, Alabama. Miss Erica Roberts and Mr. Jesse Roberts, both of Pineview, Georgia. 33 beloved grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, His beloved sisters, Mrs. Norma Jean Power and her husband, Mr. Melvin Power of Rochelle, Georgia, and Mrs. Bernita Carruthers of Americus, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Sidney Howard, and his wife, Mrs. Della Howard of Memphis, Tennessee. His beloved uncle, Mr. Sidney Atkins, Jr. of Savannah, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces and nephews, to include a special nephew, Mr. Lionel King of Rochelle, Georgia. A host of cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Henry Eugene Howard Jr., age 80, of 385 Mill Street, Rochelle, Georgia. Again, the family of Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter of Detroit, Michigan, formerly of Lee County, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Nellie May Cooks Whitis of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Henry Eugene Howard Jr. of Rochelle, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you, is their prayer. The Jwwilliams funeral directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray, age 66, of 1013 Sly Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 18th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Spivey Ray Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Pamela Sims and her husband, Mr. Laperton Sim of Tifton, Georgia. Miss Christina Royal and her husband, Mr. J. Royal, and Miss Victoria Ray, both of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Spivey Terrell Ray and his wife, Mrs. Lativis Anderson of Tifton, Georgia. 12 beloved grandchildren. Her loving and devoted sibling, Mrs. Brenda Ray, and her husband, Mr. Leonard Ray, Miss Priscilla Felton, and Miss Bessie Power Slay, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Charlie Power and his wife, Mrs. Joyce Power of Columbus, Georgia, and Mr. John Power of Nevada. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray, age 66, of 1013 Sly Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray, age 66, will be held Friday, October 25th at 12 noon in the sanctuary of the Little Rock Baptist Church in Araby, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Joseph Green, will officiate. The burial will follow in the churchyard cemetery. The public visitation will be Thursday, October 24th, from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Miss Barbara, age 76, of 281 King Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia, died Monday, October 14th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Joanne Moorhead of Rochelle, Georgia, Miss Irish McClendon of Pitts, Georgia, Mrs. Frances Griffin and her husband, Mr. McKean Griffin, and Miss Valerie King, both of Rochelle, Georgia, Miss Jessica Cunningham and her husband, Mr. Wayne Cunningham of Anniston, Alabama, Mr. Lionel King, Mr. Robert King, Miss Christy King, all of Rochelle, Georgia. A host of beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted sisters, Miss Julia Roberts, Miss Geneva Howard of Rochelle, Georgia, Mrs. Linda Coley of Hawkinsville, Georgia, Miss Dorothy Roberts of Warner Robins, Georgia, her beloved brothers, Mr. Hanson Roberts of Ashburn, Georgia, and Mr. Walter Roberts of Douglasville, Georgia, two beloved sisters-in-law, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Barbara Jean Roberts, age 76, of 281 King Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Barbara Jean Roberts, age 76, will be held Saturday, October 26 at 11 a.m. at the Old Wilcox County School Gymnasium in Rochelle, Georgia. The burial will follow at the Spring Hill Baptist Church Cemetery in Tippettville, Georgia. The public visitation will be Friday, October 25th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes, age 70, of 951 Comfort Bridge Road, Oakfield, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 16th at her residence in Oakfield, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, the Reverend Samuel Lee Stokes Sr. of Oakfield, Georgia, pastor of the Mount Abel Baptist Church of Lee County, Georgia, and the Blue Spring Baptist Church of Worth County, Georgia, and the Ebenezer Baptist Church of Vienna. Loving and devoted children, Mr. Samuel L. Stokes Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Victoria Stokes of Bonaire, Georgia, Mrs. Jennifer Wakefield and her husband, Mr. Bobby Wakefield of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Patrick Stokes of Albany, Georgia, Mrs. Bernita Spratlin and her husband, Mr. Rufus Spratlin of Jacksonville, Florida, Miss Katrina Stokes of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Reginald Stokes of Oakfield, Georgia, and Mrs. Selena Lewis and her husband, Mr. Daniel Lewis Sr. of Crestview, Florida. 12 beloved grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, her beloved and devoted sisters, Mrs. Carol Walker of Sylvester, Georgia, Mrs. Gladys Alfred and her husband, Deacon Paul Alfred of Oakfield, Georgia. Miss Eva Alfred of Albany, Georgia. Mrs. Brenda Mathis of Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Robbie Sweeney and her husband, Sir James Sweeney. Miss Penny Thomas, Miss Sheila Murray, and Mrs. Barbara Bradley and her husband, Sir Jeffrey Bradley, all of Sylvester, Georgia. Mrs. Bessie Mae Coward and her husband, Sir Moses Coward of Albany, Georgia. Mrs. Winfred Pearson and her husband, Sir Cephas Pearson of Fairburn, Georgia. Mrs. Jennifer Parker and Miss Sheila White, both of Huntsville, Alabama. Mrs. Vanita Colbert and her husband, Mr. Maurice Colbert of Atlanta, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Spencer Thomas and Mr. Curtis Thomas, both of Warwick, Georgia. Mr. Tony Thomas and his wife, Mrs. Beverly Thomas. Mr. Kelvin Thomas and Mr. Emmanuel Thomas, both of Albany, Georgia. Mr. Robert Lee Walker Sr. and Mr. James T. Walker Jr., both of Albany, Georgia. Her beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Ruby Davis of Valdosta, Georgia. Mr. Harold Bivens, Mr. Ricky Bivens Sr., and Mrs. Lily Pearl Wilson, all of Albany, Georgia. Her beloved in-law, Mrs. Lily Parham, and her husband, the Reverend Doug Parham. Mrs. Clara Clinton and her husband, the Reverend Daniel Clinton. Miss Nancy Clinton, Miss Shirley Crawls, Miss Patricia Ann Stokes, Mrs. Dorothy Pearl Adams, the Reverend James B. Stokes and his wife, Mrs. Lizzie Stokes, and Mr. Bernard Stokes and his wife, Mrs. Henry Stokes of Virginia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes, age 70, of 951 Crawford Bridge Road, Oakfield, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes, age 70, will be held Saturday, October 26 at 11 a.m. in the sanctuary of the Baraka Fellowship Church in Albany, Georgia, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Friendship Baptist Church Cemetery in Oakfield, Georgia. The public visitation will be Friday, October 25th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Mr. James Montrellis Wilson Jr., age 18, of 1107 Oglethorpe Street, Americus, Georgia, died Saturday, October 19, at Atrium's Health Madison in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Miss Carla Elizabeth Dodson of Americus, Georgia. His beloved and caring father, Mr. James Montrellis Wilson Sr. of Americus, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Caleb Latrell Dodson of Americus, Georgia. His loving and devoted grandmother, Miss Carolyn Wilson of Americus, Georgia. His loving great-grandmother, Miss Retha Stewart of Americus, Georgia. A host of beloved aunts, uncles, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. James Montrellis Wilson Wilson Jr., age 18, of 1107 Oglethorpe Street, Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. James Martrellis Wilson Jr., age 18, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. The Jwwilliams funeral directors serving Cordial and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home.
And now for announcements. The Old Mount Zion Hardshell Community Church annual homecoming will be observed today, Sunday, October 20th, beginning at 12 o'clock noon. Minister Eric Mathis will deliver the message. At 2 o'clock p.m., Pastor Duncan will deliver the message, and everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. The Old Corinth Baptist Church of Leslie will host the 3rd District Convention that has convened, and they will be entering into their fall revival service, which will climax today, along with the Ushers anniversary beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Deacon Darrell Walters will do a special talk on Ushers, and the pastor, Dr. C.L. McKinstry, will deliver the message. Sister Jamie Roberts is secretary. Deacon Eldridge Mercer is the chairman. Deacon C.L. McKinstry is the pastor. The Lebanon Baptist Church Ushers meeting will be on Monday, October 21st at 7 o'clock p.m. Deacon J.C. Bryant Jr., Usher President. Reverend Christopher O'Brien is the pastor. You're invited to worship with the New Life Church of Leesburg, located at 1226 Ushery Road, Smithfield, Georgia, today, beginning at 9 o'clock a.m. The Bay Point CME Church annual Steward and Stewardesses program will be held on Sunday, October 27th at 1:30 p.m. Reverend Duncan, pastor of the New Bethel Baptist Church and Byron Chapel Baptist Church, will be the guest speaker. Everyone is cordially invited to attend, and dinner will be served. Sister Daisy Smith, program coordinator, Brother Lawrence Leggett, chairman, and Sister Tangela Azubia is the pastor. Freedom Harvest Worship Center Leslie Fall Revival Services will begin on Monday, October 28th through Thursday, October 31st at 7:30 p.m. Our program will be Monday, Minister Joyce Jackson, Martha Anna Living Way. Tuesday, Pastor Dawan Griggs and Bethlehem Baptist Church. Wednesday, Minister Bernita Sampson and Greater New Lebanon Baptist Church. Thursday, Pastor Caleb Edge and the Restoration Church of Americas. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Dr. Georgia Daraso is the pastor. Men and Women's Day will be observed at the Jerusalem Baptist Church in Ellaville on Sunday, November 10th, beginning at 11 o'clock a.m. Everyone is cordially invited to attend. Minister Willie Mae Brown of Cordial will be the guest speaker. Dr. Deanne Holsley is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship at the McAfee Grove Baptist Church during their family nights on Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m., small class study Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m., and Sunday morning worship service, which begins at 9 o'clock a.m. Minister Tawanda Daniels is the secretary. Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. You're invited to worship with the New Corinth Baptist Church of Leslie. Worship service each third Sunday, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Brother Carl Smith is the pastor. The Shady Grove Baptist Church of Cordial 128th Church Anniversary will be Wednesday, October 23rd, and Thursday, October 24th at 7 o'clock p.m. Our program will be Wednesday, Free Providence Baptist Church and Spring Hill Baptist Church of Vienna and Reverend Joyce Cobb Sr. Thursday, Crossroad Baptist Church and St. James Baptist Church and Reverend Nelson Maynard. The anniversary will climax on Sunday, October 27th at 2:30 p.m. with the Lebanon Baptist Church and Reverend Christopher O'Brien's in charge of the service. Sister Shawana Davis, Church Secretary, Deacon Sammy Mumford, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Kelvin E. Drake Sr. is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church Annual Women's Day program will be observed today beginning at 11:30 a.m. Sister Judy Holton of the Mother Easter Baptist Church of Moultrie will be the guest speaker. Sister Jean Oliver Burks is program chairperson. Deacon Joe Wedges is the chairman of deacons. Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. The Bethel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church of Cordial 128th anniversary celebration will be held today beginning at 3 o'clock p.m. The Reverend Judge Willie E. Lockett will be the guest speaker. Refreshments will be served. Reverend Veronica R. Smith is the pastor. The New Hope Baptist Church of Warwick annual Men and Women's Day service will be observed today beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Evangelist Burnell Sims of the Charity Grove Baptist Church will be the guest speaker. Unity colors are black and pink. New Hope Baptist Church along with Zion Grove Baptist Church will sponsor a Give Back to the Community Day on Saturday, November the 9th from 10 a.m. until 3 o'clock p.m. at the Warwick Community Center. There will be free food, free clothes, and prizes. Everyone is invited. Mother Lovey Bagley, Church Mother, Deacon Dennis Harris, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Tiller Sims is the pastor. The New Oak Grove Baptist Church will observe the 24th anniversary of the pastor, Reverend W.W. Wilson, today. Sunday school at 9 o'clock a.m., worship service at 10 a.m. Reverend Dion Jones will deliver the message. At 2 o'clock p.m., the Mount Olive Baptist Church and St. Matthew's Baptist Church and Dr. H.C. Wilson will be in charge of the service. Everyone is cordially invited to attend. Deacon Alonzo Jones, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The Zion Hope Baptist Church of Cordial will celebrate the 9th anniversary of Pastor Willie James Felton and First Lady Linda Felton Thursday, October 24th at 7 o'clock p.m. The Emmanuel Baptist Church and Pastor Gregory Williams will be in charge of the service. The celebration will climax on Sunday, October 27th at 2 o'clock p.m. Greater Zion Hope Holiness Church of Leesburg and Apostle Henry Hosley will be the guests. Deacon Xavier Bryant is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Willie James Felton is the pastor. The Allen Temple AME Church of Cordial Women's Day program will be observed on Sunday, October 27th at 3 o'clock p.m. Reverend Sharon D. Homer of Gray Chapel AME Church, Macon, will be the guest speaker. Reverend Robert J. Anguish is the pastor. The St. King Missionary Baptist Church invites you to worship with them on Sunday, October 27th at 10:15 a.m. in celebration of Family and Friends Day. Reverend Joyce Daniels will deliver the message. At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Patrick Key of Chicago, Illinois will deliver the message. The Creek Boys will provide musical selections. Reverend Woody C. Burnham is the pastor. Reverend Joyce Daniels is the assistant pastor. First Lady Patricia Burnham is the clerk. You're cordially invited to worship at the Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church today. Sunday school at 9 o'clock a.m., worship service at 9:30 a.m. Mother Mary Henderson, Church Mother, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Chairman of Deacons, Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. The Gethsemane Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for you to worship with them this morning, beginning at 10:30 a.m. Deacon Johnny Wilson, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Cecil Strother is the pastor. The Greater Gum Creek Baptist Church invites you to worship with them. Worship service begins this morning at 10:30 a.m. Mother Norma Solomon, Church Mother, Deacon Zachary Fields, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Joseph Hagerbrook is the pastor. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship at the St. Paul Presbyterian Church today. Worship service begins at 11 o'clock a.m. If you have any questions, please contact Pastor Rita Hageman at 229-406-1333 or Clerk of Sessions Elder Ola Outlaw at 229-322-9775. You're cordially invited to worship with the beautiful Zion Baptist Church each Sunday. Worship service begins at 11 o'clock a.m. Mother Donna Mae Childs, Church Mother, Reverend Lorinda Ray, is the pastor. The Zion Hope Baptist Church invites you to worship with them each second and fourth Sunday, with Sunday school beginning at 10:30 a.m., worship service at 11:30 a.m. Deacon Xavier Bryant Sr. is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Willie James Felton is the pastor. You're cordially invited to Men's Day 2024 at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Sunday school at 9:45 a.m., morning worship at 10:45 a.m. Reverend Artist Westbrook will be the guest speaker, and everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Special music will be provided by the Men's Day Choir of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church. Deacon Ray Rollins, Men's Day Chairman. Deacon Leon Spears, Chairman of Deacons. Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the pastor. We are in the middle of early voting, which began earlier this week and will continue throughout the rest of this month. We invite you today, as has been will be set aside as Souls to the Polls Sunday. We're inviting all of our local churches and congregations to please go to the polls today. We'll be preparing to vote. The polls will open today at 1 o'clock p.m. and close at 5 o'clock p.m. The polls will open today at 1 o'clock p.m. and close at 5 o'clock p.m. After you have voted, we invite you to come to attend a fellowship dinner that will be served at Black Tree Event Center. It was a free meal that is being provided by the local chapter of the NAACP. The only admission you need is to bring your voter sticker. If you have taken advantage of voting earlier this week, simply bring your sticker and you will be able to get in as a part of the fellowship dinner. The dinner will be served today from 2 until 6 o'clock p.m. But we urge you to take advantage of this opportunity to go to vote. As we worship together, let us also go vote together. This is a very important election, and we encourage and urge you to go out. The voting again will begin today at 1 o'clock p.m. at the election office, 210 South 7th Street, room 103. Please take advantage of going to vote, and I do understand that the poll workers are excited to have us come and vote today, so please get out and take advantage of the opportunity to vote. Early voting will continue throughout this week and will continue through November the 1st. Please take advantage of this time to vote. Again, early voting today, Sunday voting, Souls to the Poll. The polls will open at 1 o'clock p.m. That concludes our announcements for this morning. And we will keep this information up on the Get Out the Vote rally so that you will have the information knowing that today as well. This will stay up throughout our announcements. That concludes these announcements for this morning.
And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of Deacon Carl Redding, who would have celebrated his birthday October 18th. Dedication requested by his beloved mother, Miss Minnie Redding, his children, grandchildren, and the entire Redding family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Gail Melissa Westbrook Dawson, who departed this life October 19, 2015. Dedication requested by her beloved sons, Christopher and Calvin, her loving grandchildren, her beloved mother, Mother Martha Ruth Westbrook of Araby, Georgia, her sisters, brothers, and the entire Westbrook, Youngblood, and Gaddy family, gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: happy birthday to Brother Richard Cross, who will celebrate his birthday on Friday, October 25th, and happy wedding anniversary to Brother Richard and Sister Brenda Cross, who celebrate their 42nd wedding anniversary on Saturday, October 19th. Dedication requested by the Cross and Napper family, and from their mother, Deaconess Martha A. Cross, and the entire family. Happy birthday, Richard, and happy wedding anniversary to Brother Richard and Sister Brenda Cross. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Happy anniversary to Deacon Norman and Mrs. Sabrina Fields, who celebrated their anniversary on Saturday, October 19th. Dedication requested by their children, grandchildren, and the entire Fields and Jones family. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Deacon James Smith and family, Deacon George Jordan and family, Vienna, Georgia, Deacon Jerome Jordan and family, Mr. Deacon Willie James and Miss Dorothy Patrick and family, past City Commissioner Mr. A.J. and Mother Vera Rivers and family, Mrs. Louise Parker Royal and family, Mrs. Helen Parker Sanders and family, Deacon Johnny and Mrs. Vera Perry and family, Vienna, Georgia, Mother Mary Benjamin and family, Mrs. Ethel Perry and family, Mother Carlton Wallace and family, Mother Willie Mae Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia, Mother Martha Ruth Westbrook and family of Araby, Georgia, Miss Willie Mae Crapp and family, Cordell City Commissioner, Mrs. Vesta Bill Shepherd and the entire Bill family, Chris County Coroner, Deacon Ricky Dawson Jr. and family, Brother Mark Westbrook and family, the Reverend Willie E. Lockett and Sister Helen Lockett and the entire Lockett family of Albany and Cordell, Georgia. The Reverend and Mrs. Dion Jones and family, Mrs. Aletha Askew, church clerk and trustee of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church, to the entire Talbot family, Deacon and Mrs. John Stubbs and family, Deacon and Mrs. Donald Talbot and family, Apostle and Mrs. Morris Jones and family, Mrs. Mary Wakefield Minion and family, Plains, Georgia, the Tyson family of Albany and Americas, Georgia, the Black family of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Mary Wilson Kitchen and family, Mrs. Mary E. Pounds and family, Miss Rosa Ford and family, Dr. and Mrs. Brandon Williams and family, Deacon and Mrs. Lawrence Williams and family of Leslie, Georgia, Mrs. Lisa Green and family, Mother Willie Mae Walker and family, Mrs. Jeanette Smith and family, Dr. and Mrs. Thaddeus Lakeler and family, Deacon and Mrs. Hentley Bryant Jr. and family, Mrs. Cynthia Pollock and family, Miss Ida Ruth Bryant and family, the McGriff family, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Fox and family, the Harriel family, Deacon Mr. Anthony West and family, Mr. and Mrs. Ricky Hardeman and family, Mr. and Mrs. Terry Boston and family, Mr. Willie Frank and Mrs. Jessie Walker and family, the Stokes family, Mr. and Mrs. Clifford Merritt and family, Mrs. Yolanda Adderley and family, Deacon and Mrs. Jeff McLeod and family, Mrs. Regina Morgan and family, Deacon and Mrs. Michael Morgan and family, Deacon and Mrs. M.L. Lewis and family, and the members of the Spring Hill Baptist Church of Tippettville, Georgia, the Reverend and Mrs. Charles Cobb and family, Mr. and Mrs. Mulford Roberson Jr. and family, Mr. Derek and Mrs. Connie Williams and family, Mr. and Mrs. Marlon Paul and family, Mrs. Jessie Colson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Larry Smith and family, Deacon Greg and Mrs. Brenda Frederick and family, Mr. and Mrs. Mickey Griffin and family, Mrs. Annie Griffin and family, Mother Melan Hawkins and family of Americas, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Leon Hawkins and family, Mrs. Charlie Mae Colson and family, Mother Vanessa Colson and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Ivory Colson, Carbon and family, Mrs. Ruby Colson and family, Deacon and Mrs. Bobby James and family, Deacon and Mrs. Xavier Bryan and family, Mr. and Mrs. Freddie Pittman and family, Mrs. Julia Bivens Hopper and family, Mrs. Juanita Harrell and family, Mrs. Carolyn Bolton and family, Mother Mary Butler and family, Mother Mary Hall and the entire Hall and Fish family, Deaconess Carrie Brooks and family, Deacon Tony Davis and family, Mr. and Mrs. Roscoe Wilson and family, Chairman, Deacon and Mrs. Johnny Wilson of the Gethsemane Baptist Church, the Mercer family, Mrs. Wilhelmina Lewis and family, the Bell family, Mr. Ray Jackson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Octavius Clark and family, Mrs. Karen Dotson and family, Mrs. Patricia Dalster and family, Deacon and Minister Leon Spears and family, Deacon William Durham and family, and the entire Durham family of Wilcox, Cordell, and Albany, Georgia. Miss Willie Mae Crappin family, the Killings family, Minister Larry, Miss Lula Spears and family, the Denmark family, the Jenwright family, the Daniels family, the Quarterman family, Mr. Silas and Miss Doretha Didell, and the members of the Big Bethel Baptist Church of DeSoto, Georgia, the Patrick family, Miss Janice Bush and family, the Perry family, the Rutherford family, the Bryant family, the Jackson family, the Slumner family, the Oliver family, Bishop and Mrs. Arthur West and family, the Leggett family, Mrs. Jackie Lattimore and family, Miss Vivian Daniels and family, the Westbrook family, the Jones family, Miss Mary Frances Davis and family, Mrs. Shalonda Donaldson and family, Mr. Justin Colbert and family, Mrs. Lavetta Fields and family, Mrs. Gwen Gaston and family, Miss Mashonda Holmes and family, Mrs. Burrow Patrick and family, Mother Willie McGill and family, Miss Mary Taylor and family, Mrs. Arma Tyson and family, Miss Rashida Fields and family, Miss Debbie Cross and family, Mr. Tommy Glenn and family, Miss Teresa Stubbins and family, Mrs. Norma Solomon and family, Mrs. Angela Solomon and family, the Reverend Woody and Mrs. Patricia Barnum and family, the members of the St. King Baptist Church, Mrs. Mary Applin and family, Judge Gail Sims and family, Mrs. Thelma Hopper and family, Miss Edna Clay and family, Mr. Keith Muntz and family of Americas, Georgia, Miss Eddie Mae Cooks and family, Mother Pearl Reed and family, Bishop Maggie Washington and family, Mother Jessie Kate Harmon and family, Pastor Ola Lofton and family, Chris County Tax Commissioner, Mrs. Deborah Lofton and family, Miss Gail Chanel and family, Mrs. Juanita Montford and family, Miss Katrina Jones and family, Miss Nancy Butler and family, Mr. And Mrs. A.B. Levant and family, the Dennis family, Mrs. Sidney Ruff and family, Mrs. Annette Ruff and family, Mrs. Quinette Ruff and family, the children of the late retired educator, Mrs. Catherine James of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Valerie Carter and family, Mrs. Barbara Roberts and family, Mr. Anthony Williams and family, Mr. Sean Hutchins and family, Miss Selma Jackson and family, the Redding family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie B. Barnes and family, Vienna, Georgia, the Lawton and Epps family, the Roger family, Mr. Charles and Miss Vivian Daniels and family, Mr. F.D. Lawton and family, Mrs. Lois Reynolds and family, Mrs. Claudette Armstrong and family, the Christopher family, the Mobley family, Mother Mary Henderson and family, Mrs. Costello Levant and family, Mrs. Dorothy Westbrook and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Nelson Maynard and family, the Reverend Fred and Mrs. Jackie Brown and family, the Reverend Jeff Wilson and family, and the members of the Odom Grove Baptist Church, the Reverend and Mrs. Joseph Hoggerbrook, and the members of the Greater Gum Creek Baptist Church, Deacon Leroy and Mrs. Diane Thomas and family, Mrs. Monica Westbrook and family, the Reverend Artist and Miss LaShawn Westbrook and family, Deacon and Mrs. Charlie Westbrook and family, Mr. Donald and Mrs. Ruby Daniels and family. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray, age 66, of 1013 Sly Avenue, Cordell, Georgia, died Friday, October 18th, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordell, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray, age 66, will be held Friday, October 25th at 12 noon in the the sanctuary of the Little Rock Baptist Church in Araby, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Joseph Green, will officiate. The burial will follow in the churchyard cemetery. The public visitation will be Thursday, October 24, from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Miss Barbara Jean Roberts, age 76, of 281 King Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia, died Monday, October 14th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Barbara Jean Roberts, age 76, will be held Saturday, October 26th at 11 a.m. at the Old Wilcox County High School Gymnasium in Rochelle, Georgia. The burial will follow at the Spring Hill Baptist Church Cemetery in Timottville, Georgia. The public visitation will be Friday, October 25th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes, age 70, of 951 Crawford Bridge Road, Oakfield, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 16th at her residence in Oakfield, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes, age 70, will be held Saturday, October 26th at 11 a.m. in the sanctuary of the Baraka Fellowship Church in Albany, Georgia, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Friendship Baptist Church Cemetery in Oakfield, Georgia. The public visitation will be Friday, October 25th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home. Mr. James Martrellis Wilson Jr., age 18, of 1107 Oglethorpe Street, Rote, Americus, Georgia, died Saturday, October 19th at the Adrian Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. James, the completion of the arrangement. The Jwwilliams funeral directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Thomas Lawrence Porter of Detroit, Michigan, formerly of Lee County, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Nellie Mae Cooks Whitis of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Henry Eugene Howard Jr. of Rochelle, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mrs. Deborah Ann Power Ray of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Barbara Jean Roberts of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Mamie Elizabeth Walker Stokes of Oakfield, Georgia. The family of Mr. James Martrellis Wilson Jr. of Americus, Georgia. This election is dedicated to all of the sick and shut in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. This election goes out to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter, and their grandson, Noble. This election goes out to my sister, Mrs. Patsy Jackson, and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. This election goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, and with us this morning, presenting our program to our Facebook watchers and our YouTube channels as well. Goes out to our YouTube watcher, Mrs. Wanda Stevens of Savannah, Georgia. Like I say, good morning to Wanda. Hope you're doing well, and the entire Edwards family of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, pastor of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church and moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association, which was held during this past week with the St. Matthew's Baptist Church of Lee County, Georgia. Goes out to his vice moderator, Dr. Dan James III, pastor of the Mount Zion First African Baptist Church here in Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to our beloved Miss Easter May Sanders, goes out to Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, the oldest staff member of the Jwwilliams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in the city of Cordele, Georgia. Again, goes out to their speaker at Bethel this afternoon, the Reverend Willie E. Lockett, who will be bringing the anniversary message at the Bethel CME Church here in Cordele on this evening. This selection goes out to our dear friend and brother of long standing, the Reverend Johnny Dean, pastor of the New Poplar Spring Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, and our good brother and friend, Deacon Jimmy Charles Montfrey and his wife, Sister Carol Montfrey, and the members of the Crossroad Baptist Church, Mother Eileen Payne and family, and again to each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. Goes out especially to Mother Adeline Lofton, church mother of the Little Rock Baptist Church of Araby, Georgia. Our final selection for this morning, this third Sunday in October. And don't forget to go out and vote today from 1 until 5 p.m. here in Cordele, Georgia. Please get out to vote today.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the Jwwilliams Funeral Home.